Several men are in a locker room in a golf club, and a cell phone, which happens to be lying around, rings. And the man opens the cell phone but keeps it on speaker mode. And he begins to talk. Everyone else in the room, all the men are just listening in because, after all, it's on speaker phone. "Hello," says the man. "Honey, it's me," says the woman. "Are you at the club?" He says, "Yes," says the man. "Well, I'm at the shopping mall," says the woman, "and I found this beautiful leather coat. It's only $1,000. Is it okay if I buy it?" "Sure, go ahead, if you like it that much." And I also stopped at the Mercedes-Benz dealership, and I saw this new 2020 model. And I saw the one that I really, really liked. "How much?" asks the man. $95,000. Mind you, all the other men in the locker room are listening in. $95,000. "Okay," says the man, "but for that price, I want you to purchase the car with all the options." "Great," says the woman. "Oh, and one more thing, honey. The house that we wanted last year, it's back on the market. And they're asking $950,000 for it." And he said, "Oh, well, then go ahead and give them an offer, but just offer them $900,000. "Okay," says the woman. "I'll see you later, honey. I love you." "I love you too, sweetie," says the husband. "Goodbye." As soon as the man hangs up, the other men in the locker room are looking at him in unbelief, thinking that he is, in fact, the perfect husband. And then the man smiles and asks the men in the locker room who listened in on the conversation, "Anyone know whose cell phone this belongs to?" It cost him a fortune. Of course, my topic or my title is "Don't Seek Out Perfection." Don't seek out perfection. I can end this sermon just like right now if I ask the women, your wives, "Is your husband perfect?" No. Yes. Who said yes? I think you're excused. You're free to go. Now here's the other question, women, wives. Will your husbands ever be perfect? Oh, somebody said yes. Okay. Somebody said in heaven. Okay, well, I'll stop right there. Our verse this morning is just the one verse. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 20. It's a verse where Solomon had said, not a single person on earth is always what? Is always good and never what? Sins. Well, is that true? Well, let me ask you, did you sin this week? Well, that's why we have a communion service once a month. It is an opportunity for each and every one of us to come clean before the Lord and make our peace with anybody who has a grudge against us, or we have a grudge against them. The word for that is atraso. Do you have atraso to somebody? Do they have something against you? If that's the case, well, forgiveness is the key. And you have to forgive each other before you even make an offering, before you can even participate in our communion time. Because what does communion mean? Communion, relation, reparation, restoration. So don't kid yourselves that communion is just one of the things that we do in church. No, it is for you. It is for me. It is for the unity of the church. You cannot not participate in communion if you do not make your peace with one another. So in your heart of hearts, you better make sure that you make your peace with each other. For the Apostle Paul said in that very same verse that we will read later on in the communion, he says, you participate, but that is why some of you are ill or sick, and some have already died. Why? Because they did not take communion seriously. I didn't say that. It's the Holy Spirit speaking through the Apostle Paul who said that. So, don't kid yourself. I'm going to be talking about the fear of God. And part of that has to do with obeying Him. If you don't obey Him in the things that He wants us to do, it's your funeral. Not a single person on earth is always good and never sins. The point that Solomon is making here is unmistakable. Human beings will never be able to figure out God because of our fallen nature. We can't see God clearly because of our fallen nature, because sin has come in the way of our relationship with Him. Once again, Ecclesiastes takes us back to the Garden of Eden. We find this in verse 29, where it says, but I did find this, Solomon says, God created people to be virtuous, or another word for virtuous is righteous. But they have each turned to follow what? Their own downward path. He already described what that path looks like. It goes downward. When God created Adam, He created Eve. They were without sin. And they had perfect fellowship with God. They had a perfect relationship with God. But when they decided that that wasn't enough for them, they pursued their own path, their own downward path, in an attempt to what? To be like God. They wanted to be like God and to pursue wisdom on their own terms, apart from God. In the story of Genesis, this is what we read. God knows that your eyes will be open. The serpent is telling Eve, right? Your eyes will be opened as soon as you eat of this fruit that was forbidden for you to eat, right? And you will be what? Like God, knowing good and evil. And the woman was convinced. She saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious. And she wanted the wisdom it would give her. So she took some of the fruit and what? And ate it. And then she gave some to her perfect husband. At that time, he was perfect. Who was with her, and what did he do? He ate it too. He ate it also. Before human beings fell into sin and rebellion against God, the world was created perfect in every way. Human beings, before sin came into the world, they knew how to obey God. They knew how to please God. That's what sin is all about. Sin is just missing the mark in pleasing God. And this is what happened to Adam and to Eve. Their communication between human beings and God was perfect as well. Adam and Eve, they didn't need a Bible translation to communicate with God. When God spoke plainly, they listened and understood Him perfectly. No theological interpretations, no external translations or versions, not even additional revelations about God was necessary to know God's will and God's ways. And Satan knew exactly where to try and attack Adam and Eve. He promised that if they would just eat the fruit, they would become like God, knowing all things. And so, what was Eve's main motive for taking and eating the forbidden fruit? Well, the Bible tells us she wanted to gain wisdom. But that sin separated them from their perfect relationship with God. And ever since that time, men and women have been trying to figure out God and His ways and His will. Their human failure was limited because their sin nature got in the way. Do you understand this? Is this clear? I can say it again. Because we're fallen, sin has come into the world and it has affected our relationship with God. We can't see Him for who He is. We can't see Him clearly. We see Him as though it's through, like Paul said in Corinthians, like through a dark, glass, a clouded glass. Now, in the middle of this passage, we run across a couple of verses that don't make a whole lot of sense at first glance. And the first one is found in verse 28, where Solomon said, I discovered that a seductive woman is a trap more bitter than death. Her passion is a snare. The word snare is another way of saying trap, right? And her soft hands are chains. Those who are pleasing to God will escape her. But sinners will be caught in her snare or caught in her trap. Solomon's readers would have understood what he had written here. But we need a little bit more biblical background so that you and I can make sense of it in our 21st century. The first thing that we find is that the woman Solomon is referring to is the seductive woman. In the book of Proverbs, he puts a human face, right, on wisdom. He puts a human face on foolishness through the example of two women. The virtuous woman, or the righteous woman, who is a picture of wisdom. And the second woman is the adulterous woman, who is a picture of foolishness. Therefore, the woman Solomon referred to is obviously foolishness. And it is quite clear that the person who fails to fear God, to please God, is easily trapped by foolishness. The second thing that we find is that the captive sinners who are trapped by foolishness are people who willfully choose to live sinful lifestyles. But it's not the people who fear God but occasionally slip back into sin. No, it's the ones who willfully choose to live sinful lifestyles. The person who fails to fear God will never escape foolishness and will never, ever find wisdom. On the other hand, though there are certainly a great advantage to fearing God and having the opportunity to live wisely before Him, even that wisdom will never be sufficient to completely understand God or even manipulate Him for our own selfish gain. Now, due to our sin nature, our wisdom, your wisdom, and my wisdom will always be limited. Solomon deals with this matter in the following verses where he says, "This is my conclusion," says the teacher being Solomon. In Hebrew, teacher is kohleth, which is in reference to the king, Solomon. And this is what he says, "I discovered this after looking at the matter from every possible angle. Though I have searched repeatedly,